saying, like, after during the COVID years, being told, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're listening to conspiracy theorists. I've heard some pretty wacky ones from like the blue anon
Yes.
people. I love them, and I wouldn't care if they were conspiracy theorists, by the way. But some wacky things about Kate Middleton being a hologram and all that stuff. And these are the same people who were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you didn't take the COVID vaccine. Why are you listening to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? He's a conspiracy theorist."
Right.
So
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've noticed the same things too.
It's really interesting and kind of wild. But yeah, maybe we can get more into that here in a minute. Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, February 3rd. We are live on YouTube and on X, and this is the Solid Ground live stream. You might see a new face here. We have Dr. Aaron Kindsvatter joining us, which is delightful. And Aaron, we've had, I think you've been on at least one other live stream with us, maybe a couple. And you and I have recorded a few conversations for this channel. So there's plenty of Aaron archives if people want to go back. Oh, and he popped off, but I think he'll be right back. He's been having a little issue with his tech. So, here he is. Here he is. Yeah, it's been popping on.
They've got like one of those things where you press a button and the
ejector button.
Yeah, it's like
gets
All
out.
right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. At least it wasn't a big hook that came and dragged you off. But Aaron, do you want to just really briefly introduce yourself for people who have not seen you before?
Yeah, well, so I'm a former professor of counselor education, and I'm currently a psychotherapist, and I practice in Vermont, and will shortly be practicing in Florida. And I'm speaking to you all from my new office in Florida here. And something else that people might be interested in is that I've started an organization called the Society for the Ethical Practice of Psychotherapy, and in an effort to sort of keep the therapeutic relationship depoliticized. Right now, there is a very, very strong effort to inject politics into personal psychotherapy. So I'm trying to do what I can to ask people to reconsider that practice.
Oh, fantastic. It's so needed. Thank you so much, Aaron. And people in the chat are noticing that we're in color today instead of black and white. Yeah, student of rhythm, back in color I see. And James from Bahia says, glorious technicolor, so modern. Thank you, guys. We are, I guess, we haven't in a while done a round of introductions. Do you want to just take a moment, just a
Sure.
brief, give a 30-second intro for yourselves? Go around and do that. Deborah, you want to go first?
Oh gosh, I don't have a good one. Can I pass? I mean, I'm going to pass.
Well, what's your name? And
I'm Deborah Knox. I live in New York City. I'm a disaffected Democrat, and I don't have the whole spiel because I'm not a psychotherapist.
That's enough.
I lead support groups here. Anyway, blah blah.
Deborah's a huge part of Solid Ground. She's a group facilitator and just a huge part of what we do. And Jenny, how about you?
So I'm Jenny Holland. I write a Substack called Saving Culture from Itself. I'm based in the United Kingdom, specifically Northern Ireland. I'm half Irish, half American. I used to work in newspapers in the US, in New York and New England. And I mostly just write on my Substack and some other publications like Spiked. I write a lot about the media. So like Deborah, I'm not a therapist, but I like to watch crazy people.
Thanks, Jenny. Christine?
Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Stephen-Wolk, and some of you would recognize me, I think, from doing some recording some chats and some live streams in the past with Leslie on her platform. I'm also a professor of psychology who left my position because of the critical social justice push. And since then, I've been just working on any kind of movement that helps bring therapy back into the classroom and into the the therapy room. So I work right now for an organization called Critical Therapy Antidote, and it's a network of therapists who are kind of the dissident therapists who are sort of anti woke CSJ in the therapy room, and pro returning back to the healing ethos of therapy. So we're a great organization. You can find me there too.
Awesome.
Critical
Thank you.
Therapy Antidote. Yep.
Yep.
Thank
Critical
you.
Therapy Antidote is a wonderful, wonderful organization. Can't recommend them enough. And yeah, I'm Leslie Elliot Boyce, and this is a YouTube channel that I started a couple of years ago in order to talk about my concerns around counselor education and how it's become very politicized, what that means for people in education, in higher ed, in K through 12 as well, and what that means for clients who are seeking counseling services, just the broader culture as well. So that's what it's been a really important project to me for a couple of years, having these kinds of discussions. So, and of course, our conversations range all over the place. So it's not just on that one topic. Deborah, would you like to start us out with the intro to Solid Ground before we get into discussion?
I will.
Yeah. Thanks.
Solid Ground is a peer support community for anyone concerned about the imposition of critical social justice and/or authoritarian measures such as medical mandates in their workplace, university, children's schools, or community. We offer weekly online peer support groups in which members share ideas, thoughts, and support for how to navigate the impact of these ideologies and answer the question, where do we go from here? You can join our peer support group for $10 a month, and you can join our forum on locals for just $5 a month. To find out more, please visit solidgroundsupport.com. And please note that Solid Ground does not provide psychotherapy or legal advice, and nothing we do should be construed as such.
Thanks, Deborah. And so, Deborah, you were talking about some of the tensions that have arisen as people are trying to sort through what they think about the new administration. It seems like I hesitate to even have an opinion right now. I'm just kind of watching and observing what's going on, and some of it with concern, some of it with sort of hesitant optimism, but also some things that seem pretty scary and chaotic to me. So what were some of your thoughts that you were having?
Yeah, well, what's interesting, there's both things that are causing further divides between people, but also I think some people are really wrestling within themselves. For example, many women I know are quite glad about some of the executive orders that have to do with gender, medicalization of children. And then maybe there's something like, well, now, like I'm in a women's group where there's a lot of women that live in Canada. And now they're like, wait a minute, what are you doing with these tariffs? And even feeling betrayed by Americans because of that. And so like, even when one person could be very glad about some things, then other things are freaking them out. And then just amongst, I see people on the right that are very happy with all of Trump's measures, being very happy and then sometimes gloating, I must say, a little bit, right? And then you have the people on the left who are just screaming like their hair's on fire, about some things that maybe their hair isn't on fire, and yet there's alarming things going on. So I'm just watching, even my own family, I thought, how am I going to get through like 4 years of this, with needing to talk about it constantly and how awful every single thing that's happening all the time. And I just basically didn't say anything as best I could. I kept trying to get pulled into saying something. I'd say I don't agree with certain things, or I don't like what's happening in some things, but other things I just sort of kept quiet. I don't know. So I just wonder about everybody's nervous systems for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think, Christine? What's been your observation of people right now?
Yeah, very similar. I mean, I've personally just avoided conversations with people about about politics in general. I have most of my friends are very much on the left. I'm probably the only one I'm a registered independent. So I would say I'm kind of bits and pieces of both sides, depending on what it is. And I don't see a whole lot of that. I see a whole lot of extreme, either you're like a very left kind of, leftist radical on one side, and on the other side, everything's a conspiracy, ultra red, everything's a conspiracy. And, Hillary has been taken to Gitmo and has already been killed, and Obama has been killed. These are all active, this kind of really extreme. So I don't comment too much, and that's how I've learned to kind of get by. I'm very grateful that my husband and I are very similar in how we think about these things, because he's probably the person that I can talk to about it the most. And even with him, I don't want to spend too much of my energy on politics because I feel very drained. Just this overall sense of being drained. Whether I liked some of the executive orders, which I have, some I'm wondering, well, what's going to happen with that? And, similar questions. But it's exhausting. So I'm trying the best I can to just stay out of that and look at why I'm friends with certain people. What other qualities, do we have in our friendships that allow for me to be friends with them, and sort of getting back to those basics, because these other topics have been just too hot for us to get through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jenny or Aaron, have you noticed anything, or what are your thoughts?
Well, my wife is Irish and not a fan of Trump, so so in talking about some of the things that are happening that I'm I'm happy about with the current administration. Sometimes there's sort of a price to be paid for that. So personally, I'm just being very cautious to think about where people are at, and how how to what extent they're going to find conversations about what's going on currently interesting or useful.
Uh-oh. Yeah, Aaron's having problems with his connection. He keeps popping in and out. So, Jenny, from over there, I mean, you're not American, or not 100% American, not living in America.
I'm sorry about this. I don't know what's going on. My internet connection is strong, but my computer, I think, is, I don't know, maybe a Democrat or something. I'm not sure. but I was just trying to, just be thoughtful about to what extent people are going to be receptive to conversations about what's going on, and receptive to the fact that, as difficult as I know the current situation is for people, for me personally, this had to happen. There was no way. I mean, I don't know what would have happened if we would have had another 4 years of what was going on with the Biden administration, or someone even more more to the left. So I think it's very hard to talk about the substance of ideas right now, because they're tied up with Trump, who people in my spheres just have such strong feelings about. Yeah. My mom would, very, very, very negative. In talking with my mom, for example, and I talk with my wife and my best friend, and we start to talk about these things, and they're kind of like, I don't care, and so it's hard to talk about the substance of what's going on, because they're associated with a pretty divisive figure. So. And so I try to set my expectations accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is definitely one of those times that I'm glad that I'm not in the States, so I don't have to. I miss my family. I miss being away from my American family a lot. But this is one of those times where I'm glad, because it would be painful. It would be trying. But to be honest, haven't we been in this situation since about 2017? I mean, 2018 maybe. I think 2018 was when I started to see this really have an impact on personal relationships, friendships, and family relationships, because of woke, the infiltration of woke into like all kind of middle class East Coast families. I mean, that was my experience, and friend groups. I haven't talked to, like, when he was elected in November, I was jubilant, but mostly because, Aaron, what you're saying, I was just relieved that we weren't going to have to face down another 4 years of even more extreme craziness. And it felt like a little bit of a return to common sense. It felt like a little bit of vindication after feeling hounded and silenced.
Yeah.
Not I was personally silenced, but this sense of just being like under attack psychologically and
Yeah.
for so long, like before Trump was even elected, really. And I couldn't share it with anyone. Like I wanted to call my oldest friends, it was one of those things like, hey, look at me, like we did it, but I obviously didn't. I mean, that is not a hardship at all. I did have one funny interaction with an American here, right after the election, in a shop that he ran, and I was saying, oh, how do you like living here? Meeting in Northern Ireland, and he instead answered with a tirade about the stupid people who voted for Trump. And I had been waiting for someone to bring Trump up here. I was hoping like someone in a supermarket or some like random encounters, people would bring it up. He was the only person who brought it up, and I said, "Okay, I just wanted you to know that I am one of those people."
Ooh.
And I thought he was going to get angry, but interestingly, he completely backpedaled. And I think that like 4 years ago, or maybe during the first Trump election, he would have gotten really angry and sort of doubled down. But he was really embarrassed when I said, actually, no, I'm one of the 70 million morons who voted for Trump. He actually became completely like submissive and backpedaled. And, oh, I get it. I get it. I get it. So, I mean, that was
That's
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was very interesting to me.
That is really interesting because a lot of people, in hearing somebody criticize a particular group so strongly, would not want to volunteer that they belong to that particular group. So you kind of took a social risk by saying, yeah, that's me. And then he was confronted with the really uncomfortable realization that he'd been kind of making an assumption about who he was speaking with that wasn't correct.
Correct. And I think because I present as like what I always was, which is an East Coast middle class liberal, that really threw him. And he was very polite. He was very non-confrontational. Yeah, it was weird. I had made a decision that I was going to tell someone. If someone asked me, I was going to just say, yes, I'm not going to hide this. I'm going to own it. I'm actually delighted. I have nothing to be afraid of, etc. But having said that, if I was at family dinners, that would be very hard.
I respect people who don't want to talk about their politics or who they voted for. And I think actually that used to be the norm, to be polite and not talk about these things openly in polite company. And now we all talk about it really openly. But I have been open about my own process with this. And I am somebody who voted for Trump this time, not because I'm an enthusiast or a big fan of his, but because it just seemed like the better choice to me in a lot of ways. But I'm a very cautious. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm also not Trump deranged. I'm just sort of watching this and making the decision that makes the most sense to me. But when I had a situation kind of like that on election night, and I think I may have talked with you guys about that. Or I was at a pottery studio and I was taking a class, and everybody is watching the election results rolling in, and they're gasping and they're like, oh my gosh, and just on edge. They're sharing their phones and checking in on it, and they start talking about why they voted the way they did. And it was the sort of things that they were talking about with reproductive freedom were these really like the wildest exaggerations of what the issues were. It was like, well, I don't want it to be illegal to have a miscarriage, kind of stuff that you were hearing them say. Like they were really afraid, or had worked themselves up to a place where they were afraid that you would get thrown in jail for miscarrying a baby, And I said, oh, I voted for him. I mean, I kind of cut through it all because there was so much. It was like the assumption that we all believed the same thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to make anybody really uncomfortable, but I also just kind of wanted to shatter that a little bit, just
That's really brave.
Like, I voted for him, and it was
brave.
interesting how they responded. It wasn't quite the backpedaling that gentleman did in that shop, but it was like they got quiet. One person did express curiosity, and she was conciliatory with me.
Wow.
And one person kind of slammed things around really passive aggressively and ended up leaving without saying goodbye to me. But it was interesting to be in that situation.
That's amazing. You didn't tell us that, I don't think.
Didn't tell you that? Oh, maybe I told Christine that. No? Okay, interesting.
No.
Must have told Benjamin.
Yeah.
I told somebody.
Well, Leslie, I have a question. What was it that made it important for you personally to, I guess, in effect, sort of be upfront or forward with people about where you were coming from?
That's a good question. I think it was respect, that I respected those women too much to have them talking like that with the illusion that I was in agreement with them. I felt like a spy. I felt like I was hiding something. I have too much respect for myself and for them to sit in the room and pretend like I agree with something. And if these relationships, and they're not deep relationships, these are kind of, I see them in the studio. They're, it's just but they're friendly.
Right.
And I have a good rapport with them, have had for a while. And I just respect the relationships too much to be silent, I suppose.
But there's isn't there a human cost in pretending? Isn't there a human cost in interacting with someone without a sense of genuineness, having to hide who one is? It's so and I'm saying, isn't it? What I mean is, that's what I've experienced, that having to keep one's head down and effectively hide in plain sight. There is something very dehumanizing about that, especially when it seems like that's you have to do that under the threat of some sort of censure. It's very dehumanizing.
Yeah, Deborah, you had an observation about that.
Well, I mean, I had to do that somewhat this weekend where at least in my family, I spoke up on a few particular issues or orders. And most of the time I sat there and just sort of fumed, but I also thought this is taking a toll actually on my body. And,
Right.
and I would go in the other room and I mostly was quiet, but there were a few times I did speak up, and I'm so embarrassed. I did literally shake.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much response to any of the, one person would sort of counter it, so it was hard. It was sort of either giving like a very specific fact about something or whatever, or why people thought this was a good order. And so I did a little bit so I could even stay in the room, because there is this way that, I have to kind of, I hate that erase statement. It doesn't feel like that, but I just feel like the chasm between me and these people is widening and widening and widening. There is this terrible fear, like I'm going to be hated or rejected, or I don't know. I already have an issue with feeling like I'm being seriously judged and disdained on some level. But at some point, I was like, I've got to say at least a couple things, even just to clarify if people are upset. That maybe the thing they're upset about isn't as upsetting as they think. So yeah, just to kind of, where would he go? Anyway,
yeah, he's
Aaron's point. Yeah.
How did they take it?
Yeah. Good question.
I don't want to name particular people. One person just didn't want any of it, and just it was interesting, the gender thing. Somehow that came up I have one relative, but by marriage, who none of my family is in a regular workplace or in school or anything, so they don't see things going on. So they don't believe things are going on. But I will say this one relative by marriage was like, I saw someone put pronouns in their email. What is that? That is so weird. And I was like, he never
Yeah.
So I appreciated he was having like just a normal, natural reaction to how crazy some of this stuff is. And there was another relative who was saying, well, there are people who are what do you call it? What are the disorders? They're born with the, what is it? The developmental disorder, whatever, of the body, right? Blah, 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 And so with him, there was a little bit of opening that things might be a little crazy, but they don't see the widespread nature of it. They have no idea of how institutions have been forcing people to adhere to these things, to say things they don't believe at risk of losing their jobs. That's just like inconceivable to them because they're just not in that world. And then I kind of get accused of, well, you're just focusing on really small things because there's going to be a coup, like that, right? So,
well, can I make play devil's advocate with this though? The self-censorship issue, I very much agree that when it comes to groupthink and the pressures to say that you believe a certain thing, that this can be really harmful. And even the pressures to not speak up about something, this can be very harmful. But also, is there maybe, again, just to play devil's advocate, do we place too much emphasis on needing to share our own thoughts about things sometimes, or to have all these things be known? Are we living in a time and place where people share too much and expect too much validation for their inner world?
I mean, I think it's interesting to me. My own reactions are that I publicly have said many times that I voted for Trump. I was very public about what I didn't like about the previous administration, how I thought I couldn't handle another 4 years of them, etc. It's talking to people that I know who are in my personal life that I struggle more with being open and not self-censoring. It's not saying it publicly, actually. I mean, I was even public when I resigned from my position at school, right? As a professor, I was very public about that. I made a video about it, and it, went to FAIR, and a lot of people saw it. So it's interesting, but I have more of that kind of self-censoring response or reaction with people that are very close to me, because I don't want to have the conflict, and I don't want to have those difficult conversations that can create conflict that I don't think either one of us, whether it's me and a best friend or me and a family member, I don't think that our relationship will or should be affected by what it is we believe in when it comes to politics. So I'm a lot more careful that way. But I will publicly say to everybody that I did vote for Trump, and I was very happy he won. And I'm, thrilled about some of his executive orders, not all of them, some. It's just the conflict with the people that I love and know, and I don't want this to be something that impacts it negatively. Maybe that makes me a little bit unbrave. I don't know, but it's more about that conflict that is difficult for me to withstand.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, actually. I know exactly what you mean. It's so much harder to do that to someone you love, or with someone you love, and you have that you don't want to have that conflict, or even just people where you have social relations that you value keeping them cordial. I know exactly what you mean.
When I even eventually set a boundary with one person, I said, I'm not talking about this anymore. I said, there's not any room for another point of view here. So I'm not doing it, which didn't go over well, but.
Yeah.
Well, it is interesting. I'm thinking back to that experience that you had, Jenny, which was more, there was more clarity, I think, in that with that shopkeeper than in the experience I had with the women in the group. But how much of, like, there's another woman that I just know casually from the studio, because it's this big open space where people can come and do their work together. And there's, you're not really working with anybody. You're working kind of side by side. They're doing their thing, you're doing yours, but you can kind of get into these conversations. And she's a really nice lady. I like her a lot. And she's made a couple of times, she's made a point of making sure I know she's a liberal. Like, it's important for her to know that I know that. But it's not because she thinks I'm not. It's because she clearly thinks that I am, and she wants me to think she's a good person. So there's this kind of signaling that's going on, and it's like, it's really interesting to me. And I was at a grocery store the other night, and I'm behind a woman checking out, and the woman checking out and the cashier have this very superficial, like, how's the weather level conversation about how stressful they are about how everything that's happening. It's like they use these kind of coded, vague words to say, oh, I know, it's just terrible. Oh my God, I know, just take care of yourself, whatever it is, It's like we're talking about a snowstorm and she's going to have to drive home in the snow. It's about Trump, though. And there's this way that people are making assumptions about the other people around them and then tailoring themselves to fit it. But like you said, Deborah, when you're doing that, you're signaling in such a way that you don't leave room for another perspective to be heard. And so that's what I really liked about your experience with that man, Jenny, because it broke that spell. And now he's
Yes.
just a person dealing with another person, and he has to go back to being curious about you, or polite about, the differences between the two of you.
Yeah, that's the key phrase, to break the spell, because that's what I have been seeing happen since 2017, 2018, or 2016, even since the evergreen thing. That the this sort of the viciousness of woke ideology cast a spell over people generally, and it became impossible to say things like a woman doesn't have a penis. And that meant it, you had to say it in order for the spell to break. I mean, that's really what it was. It felt like a spell. It felt like a spell was cast over normal human conversations. And the only way to break the spell was to, say taboo things like men can't get pregnant, Trump isn't Hitler. And
Right.
it just has to be done. And you just, every one of us makes these individual calls as to like, what is the cost, the risk reward in that specific relationship, in that specific interaction. And I'm very lucky. I don't live in America. So some guy saying, oh, so I can't believe 70 million morons voted for Trump, that is no risk. I never have to walk into his vintage junk shop again. Like that is no loss to me. And so it was easy for me to make that calculation. But that's why I think the pottery thing, that's more intimate. That's a more regular part of your life. I find it much harder to do with women anyway.
Yeah.
Men, it's easy. I don't mind offending men.
I saw 97 Cents mentioned a healthcare worker talking about this, and I've had that too. I've had like this physical therapist who a couple of times has talked to me like about the election, the results, even made a comment about, oh, those people that must have voted for Trump in this neighborhood, it's because they're rich white people. Like they said that to me, and I'm sitting there going like, I actually pointed out he's Chinese American. I said, well, I actually think that neighborhood is highly Chinese American, and I know that community has been kind of upset what's happening with schools and their education. So, he didn't respond to that, but it is ridiculous if you go to like a healthcare person and they're assuming you agree with them.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's
Aaron, you're muted for some reason there, and I don't know what that is. Maybe you can figure that out and test it with us. Christine, you want to go on with what you're about to say?
I was going to say, it's been actually quite the opposite here. I live in California, which of course people see as very deep blue, but in the outskirts of the major cities here in other counties, it's very deeply red. So when I'm walking around, I'm at my hairdressers, for example, people just had this natural assumption that everybody in there must have voted for Trump. So I remember one lady walking in and talking to somebody that was sitting next to me, and she goes, "Oh my gosh, what a relief. We're finally going to have a country again. Aren't you so excited?" And I look over, and this woman's wearing her MAGA hat. And they start high-fiving, and then there are other people that are sitting, in the chairs waiting to get their hair done. They're all excited. And it was a much different experience than if I had driven 5 miles south. I would have been right in LA County, in the midst and in the cusp of all of that kind of very deep blue, where that wouldn't have been the assumption. The assumption would have been, that I voted for Kamala and Harris because I'm a woman and because I'm of color, right, is what they would have thought. So, but not where I live, and I'm in California. So when people say that California is all blue, that's not true. It is very deeply blue in some areas, but it's deeply red in many other areas. So it was an interesting experience.
Yeah, that really is. Aaron, did you get it working?
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay. Yes, I did. So what I had to do is I had to switch over my browser. That's why I kept blinking out there, and I apologize for that. Apparently, Safari doesn't want me on here. It wonders about the company I'm keeping.
Right.
Well, I wanted to quickly mention something on this spell theme, because there's a really good episode, if people listen to the Dark Horse podcast, where they interviewed Walter Kern just in the last few days. And Walter Kern reported from being at RFKJ's hearing, and he sat pretty much like right behind him. So he had the whole view of the senators and what they were doing. And he said the whole thing was a magic trick. Like he said, people were using, he said, incantatory words. I mean, it was just so anyway, this just ongoing theme of spectacle and or people being hypnotized or distracted, and these things that we can do, like Jenny or whatever, or Leslie, like kind of cuts through. I think this is a really interesting metaphor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is. I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot to say about this, and I think that one of the ways that this is impacting people right now is in terms of friendship and family. Like, how do I loved something that you said a little bit ago, Christine, because I think it's really important to find other reasons why you're connected to the people that you have in your life, because you didn't you're not connected to the people who are important to you because you agree about Trump or not Trump. You're connected to them because they're your family, or because you shared something at a particular point that made you attracted to each other for a relationship, for a friendship, or for whatever. Or, whatever it is. Friendship and family bonds transcend politics, and often have the people can be wildly at odds with one another. So we have to be able to get back to a place of tolerating that and accepting that there's more to life than political persuasion. I mean, my best friend, I met her when I was 21 and she was 26. And she was a Christian Republican, and I was an agnostic Democrat. And we disagreed really vehemently about some of these issues. We'd get like to the point where we decided we can't talk about these things. But she's still been my best friend for 26 years, and we've moved towards each other in some ways politically, but not completely. But it just goes to show you don't have to make a friendship about those things.
Yeah, I think that's what it used to be like in the old days before whatever the thing was that changed everything. Trump derangement syndrome, MSNBC. I honestly don't know what it was, but it used to be like that. That used to be kind of normal.
But there also is this very much a focus now on who you are and the degree to which your views should be given weight or legitimacy. Uh, you, the degree to which what you are saying should be taken as truth. Um, uh, is very much tied up now in who someone is. And so someone was asking earlier about the degree to which we might, share who we are. Uh, Now, when you, um, from what I understand, when you publish a journal article, people ask that you put identity markers in there.
Mm.
And so we're being asked to share more and more of who we are. And so there seems to have been this erosion of the boundary between who one is and what one
Uh-oh.
thinks.
Did you guys just lose me or just go to me? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just went to you.
There we
Yeah.
go. I'll put us all back in.
Yeah.
I don't want. Where's Deborah? There she is.
I
Sorry
fell
about that,
off.
you guys. We're just having all kinds of
We all
fun with our
did.
tech.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's really concerning, the identity markers, and since especially these identity categories are, what even are they anymore? Even male and female doesn't mean what it's supposed to mean. I mean, it doesn't. Male and female didn't used to mean anything about your personality, but now it's being used as a proxy for feminine and masculine, personality characteristics by some people. Gender ideology would have us do that.
And thoughts you should have associated with them, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's this retreat to the stereotype, which really turns me off, and it really concerns me. I see that when that really concerns me is when I see that embedded in professional counselor training. It either they want to they want to revert to stereotypes, or they want to uh, react in an extraordinary way against stereotypes, almost to the point where we're most comfortable when men are more like women and women are more like men. And that, in my mind, that is just as bad as uh, suggesting that who someone is as a man or a woman has to look a particular way. And yeah, I don't. I wish more thought and reflection could be given on just kind of being okay with who people are as individuals.
Mm-hmm.
But there seems to be some anxiety about that I don't understand.
97 cents says, I think it's important to clarify the when you're referring to when you're talking about categories that didn't define people. And by the gender one, I would say, I still think it's kind of strange that gender ideology coming in loads woman and man with all these sorts of, I guess, qualities that they didn't used to have. Like it being a woman only meant that you were born a girl and you grow into a female human adult when you grow up. It didn't have you could be all kinds of different things and be a woman. Being a man just meant you're born a boy and you grow into an adult male human when you grow up. It didn't mean anything about you in terms of choice or personality or how you want people to see you. They could see you all different ways, but that part was just a given. If you want me to say when that was, I don't know if I'm the best source for exact dates on this, but I'll say most of my life until fairly
Mm-hmm.
recently.
Yeah, like the 70s probably on when it was like Free to Be You and Me or whatever. Like after that came out and it was sort of like we're not really doing stereotypes anymore,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
But people's political beliefs almost became like status signifiers and also core lifestyle components. That's one thing. But I also think that to give people who are very upset at this time their due, including all the people that I love very much back in the States, they also live in an entirely different reality. They are not seeing the same media we are. They're not seeing the same stories being covered, or they're similar but spun in such a way as to give them a misunderstanding of the situation. And the weird thing to me, this going back to the spell ideas, you know, we're seeing mirror images of the same issue. So to give those people their due, they think that they're genuine and they're upset. They're genuinely afraid. They're genuinely good faith belief is that Trump is going to collapse the world or whatever. But in general, there's also been this thing that there's been overproduction of college educated elites, and people are very attached to their dumb opinions.
No, I not to switch gears too fast, and if you guys want to keep making points on this, we sure can. But when we were before we went live, Aaron, you were saying that you'd had some interesting interactions around sharing a video, the video conversation with Dev. I don't know if everybody's seen that yet, but there's a conversation that I recorded and posted this past Friday with a young man who's a current counseling student in a master's in counseling graduate program. And so that was the one. And you had some thoughts about that.
Well, yeah. First off, I thought Dev was incredibly compelling, and I was deeply, deeply touched by,
Yeah.
well, just his bravery in putting himself out there in that way. It clearly was something that costed him, and I I wanted to share that with a larger audience. So there's a listserv that goes to all of the counselor educators, which would be people who are in Dev's program and so forth. And I shared this in the hopes of just would you please look at what the impact of what you're doing is, and think about that in terms of uh, what the implications are for the eventual patients of the people who are graduating from your program who buy into all of what you're selling. So, people who take Sue's book, whatever it's called now, what it used to be, Counseling the Culturally Different. but now it's something else. But taking Sue's book and then taking Sue's ideas into the therapy room with unsuspecting patients, which I've really been concerned about since about 2020 or so, when I sort of came out publicly about my concerns about this. Um, so as so, but I thought Dav was so compelling in the way that he put this that I was expecting an overall sort of, whoa, hey,
Mm-hmm.
let's pay attention to what this person says. I think what disturbed me was in the response of some of the people on this listserv was the lack of reflection on this. And there was a particular kind of response that really disturbed me, which there were sort of two responses. One was this like really sticky, sickly sweet. Oh my gosh, I'm so concerned that Dev feels this way. And so it's which is something that I encountered a lot when I was working as a professor. It's this faux empathy that where it's like, I'm so sorry that you're feeling that you're feeling so bad right now. It's very difficult work that's going on, and what's happening there is that the person who takes that perspective is what they're attempting to do is to use empathy to make the person feel better in the short term, what until while they keep them involved in a process of shaming,
Mm-hmm.
and so that eventually, a person like Dev's defenses will be broken down enough so that they will take what is being sold by Sue and by people who are, who think Sue's ideas have merit,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that they will be accepted unconditionally. What this person is attempting to do is to facilitate a psychological process known as introjection, where uh, a person under duress accepts unconditionally uh, the views, values, behaviors of the people around them. And so that's one of the reasons why groups are so important in these kinds of trainings, is that the group
Mm-hmm.
can provide the pressure that causes the duress, and the short term sort of faux sympathy or empathy is used to keep the person engaged in the process, and it's used to keep them from getting out, but it's also used to make the relationship between uh, the person who is trying to get this across. It's used to make that relationship more important to the person who's questioning.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to see that used all the time, and
Do you
it's
think
just
it's
so disturbing to
Do you
see.
think they're aware that they're doing that when they're doing it, or do you think it's happening subconsciously?
I think that the person who is doing this, a person who will use those kinds of tactics, has a kind of personality that does not lend itself to awareness. And I also think that they have a kind of insecurity that makes them desperate enough to want to do this without reflecting on what they're doing. And that's why professions are supposed to be safeguarded by codes of ethics and principles that do not
Right.
allow for the intrusion of insecurity. And
Hmm.
yet that seems to be breaking down because everyone is terrified to call these kinds of behaviors into question. The other thing that I saw in the responses to Dev is this barely contained contempt for a colorblind perspective. It's almost like, I won't say any more right now, but what the person clearly wanted to say is, you are an evil, horrible human being for believing what you believe, and you clearly are a wounder of the vulnerable, and
Mm-hmm.
you should be sent to whatever.
Re-education camp.
You should be sent to re-education camp. And that's one place where, if people want to see this in writing and think about it, there's this article out there that's called "Talking to Your White Clients About
Uh-huh.
Race." It's written by
Mm.
someone's perspective, and in this article, and this author, you can tell the author, talking to other so-called anti-racist therapists, is saying, um, it's really hard not to pounce when you are encountered with a racist worldview. And what he means by a racist worldview from this perspective is a person who is coming from a colorblind perspective. It's not
Mm-hmm.
someone who thinks of people less than because of their immutable characteristics. But again, if you go back and you read this article, you can just hear this barely contained contempt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really terrified by two things. I'm terrified by the prospect of this person who uses the sickly sweet kind of false sympathy or empathy in their sessions with a patient, because it's extremely subtle and it's extremely powerful. Like, you want the person seems like the most caring, responsible, I've got your back kind of person in the world. And it's sort of like, oh, and when you understand and when you accept this, it's not going to hurt so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I've
that sounds a
seen,
lot like what I was taught in my graduate
I've
program, honestly. It's
seen
like,
that person, and it's
yeah,
gross.
it is
And
gross.
it's the
Yeah.
the fact that people that this is like not being
It would,
caught
you'd be told,
is,
yeah, doing the work is hard. It's hard to
during the work
confront
is
these
hard.
feelings.
Uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Isn't
But
that
Jenny?
I'll just say one last
Okay.
thing. What the final thing that disturbs me about this is that in this process, the people who are doing this are giving themselves a pass on shaming their students and on shaming their patients, because it's a very clever way of getting around their accountability for this, in that they say, well, shame is a natural part of this process, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's as if it's the process's fault, it's not what I'm doing here,
Mhm.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
those are like very those are very disturbing things to sort of run up against.
Yeah.
So that's some of what I saw, but I did also see some people um, coming out and saying, "Hey, maybe there really is something here to talk about,"
That's good.
and maybe we've made this idea sacred, and it needs not to be sacred, because it'll get better if it's something that we'll be able to criticize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jenny?
I was just going to ask, Aaron, isn't that literally just gaslighting?
Well, it certainly is introjection. I think gaslighting is sort of a colloquial term for a psychodynamic dynamic process that is being used in sort of DEI trainings and DEI
Hmm.
classrooms. And what you want is, you want to get the person. You don't want the person to engage in critical thinking. You want them to engage in uncritical believing,
Mhm.
because you want them to unquestionably adopt your ideas. And you're doing it, the way that people justify this to themselves is that they believe that whatever it is that they are doing to people is justified, because it is protecting the vulnerable from harm. That's the argument that they've made for themselves.
Yeah, like it's okay to be coercive in the, to support this agenda. Sorry, I'm going to turn this off.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
That it's okay to be coercive because, well, I mean, it's the old, you have in order to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. And
Right.
it's too bad that we have to break eggs, but the eggs really know they should understand that they need to be broken.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that pain you feel when you're broken, that's
You
just
deserve
your
it.
privilege being challenged, and you're not used to that privilege being challenged.
Yeah.
So
That's what I
this is
mean.
it's really it's the logic of the date rapist. It's the logic of the person who says that I'm doing this to you because I like it and I think this is a good thing. You don't understand it now, but this is actually good for you. You'll be better off for this. I've talked to a lot of people who have experienced date rape, and what they say is all the same thing. They're so confused because they're like, "Oh, he was like, he told me this was good for me," and I see a parallel between that. It's kind of like, I know what's good for you because I have this heightened consciousness, and this what I've done to you really has just helped you get in touch with your sexuality. Like I've heard that story so many times, and I see a parallel in the people who are kind of like, who have this sickly empathy.
And it's also, isn't it just this very human pattern that you see over and over again, that if someone believes in the content enough, then the process is, we can you know jump over our normal ethical standards and do it our way. This is like Machiavellianism, right? The ends justify the means. And
Mm-hmm.
Those
so we do that
just
all
get
over
in.
the place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
it'll be
it's
interesting to see what happens with the code of ethics. Right now, this is prohibited clearly, but the next iteration of the ACA code of ethics is going to be due out, I think, in 2026, and it'll be interesting to see if it still prohibits. Uh, there's very clear language in the current codes that prohibits ideological indoctrination for these reasons, and it'll be interesting to see if that survives into 2026. I guess in some ways it doesn't even really matter, because though that aspect of the ACA code of ethics is being blatantly ignored.
Mm-hmm.
But so it makes you wonder, well, what what is the point of the code of ethics if the whole profession is going to turn a blind eye to what's going on? But whatever.
that's so sinister. I mean, I'm not surprised to hear this, Aaron, that the interview with that young man was received that way. But like, just think about that dynamic. So you're training. You are a person whose job is to help people who are in pain, and you're
Yeah.
confronted with someone who is in pain. He is hurt, and you don't just say. It would actually be better to say, you know what, buck up.
Yeah.
Stand up straight and comb your hair back and stop feeling sorry for yourself. I mean, that is far less sinister. It's not sinister at all. I mean, it may be not non-empathetic, but this is so sinister where you're luring the person in pain. You're luring
Yeah.
them, and they are already vulnerable and predisposed to wanting to trust you because they want relief from their pain. And then you get them, and then you go and you stick the knife right in them. I mean, that is like
But
something
you don't
from a fairy
stick,
tale.
but you don't stick the knife right in them. First, you let them start to feel comfortable and safe. Like, first, you provide that sickly sweet,
So you groom
oh
them.
my
The
God,
love,
so
the love bombing.
Okay, so I have another devil's advocate question, and I know we only have like 2 minutes left, but let me just say, what if you are a psychotherapist and you're seeing a client who has a personality disorder and they're full of thought distortions? They think everybody is, everybody's against them, whatever it is. You can see that they are really, really distressed, but the thing that they think the distress is about, you don't think that that's what it's about. You think that that you can see something about them that they currently can't see. And so how is that different? You're trying to develop a rapport that eventually will allow you to have a discussion that opens them to something that they're that they don't think is the problem that you think is the problem. So how is it different to be holding on to that perspective versus having like a critical consciousness where you think that that this guy Dev, he's distressed, but you don't think that he's distressed about what he's actually distressed about. So you're going to develop a rapport in order to elevate his consciousness. So just
because one of the scenarios is designed to gratify the counselor's ideological needs and convictions about how society needs to change, and the other is designed to help a person live a more psychologically healthy life.
But do you think that the
And
counselor who has the critical consciousness thinks that they're doing it for some ideological thing, or do you think that they believe it earnestly in that same
I,
way?
I think most of them don't believe it
Mm-hmm.
earnestly, otherwise, they wouldn't be so sensitive to criticism about it. I think that they essentially are. Uh, Eric Hoffer wrote this book called The True Believer, and he talked about the desperation with which people attach themselves to ideas. And the overwhelming sense that I get from people who buy into this is a willingness to do almost anything
Mm.
to hold on to these ideas. And so I don't think they really believe what it is that they're selling. I think
Mm-hmm.
that when you put your finger on this, you get such a response because they're so terrified and
Mm-hmm.
they feel so. But it's but you can't. And I am sorry for that terror and for that hurt. But it's irresponsible as a profession to allow terror and hurt to form the basis of policy, which
Yeah.
is what's going on.
Well, thank you for
Can I just
that
make
great
one quick
answer. Yeah, Deborah.
comment? I'm also wondering too, in the healthier scenario, we might call it, might be invite some reality testing. It's like they might not even say they know something, but they might invite the client. Well, what if you go ask person X? I mean, I guess the person could still be paranoid and not believe what the person told them. But like, I don't know if in the second scenario, if they're not ideological, if they might engage the client into some like reality testing, and that would be different than having a set objective. I don't know. It might not be.
Mm-hmm.
I,
Yeah,
I
No,
do I
Christine.
do want to say, yeah, one thing, Aaron, to kind of back up what you just said. These people don't necessarily believe it. When I resigned from my position and I told them why I was resigning specifically, the response from the dean of the school was, well, a lot of people agree and think the way you do, Christine, but we've got to do something about this diversity situation. So this is all we've got. That was the
yeah,
answer. If I could have recorded that
I
and
guess him
published
growing a
it,
pair was not an option.
oh my God, it was really just unbelievable. But it was a lot worse than I even thought it was to get that kind of a response. It would have been better if they had those held tightly those core beliefs and values. They didn't. So
Wow.
anyway, that's all. Yeah, wow, it was eye opening.
Well, thank you. Those are
Yeah.
really great answers. And I think this has been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you all so much
Thank
for
you.
being here today. And thank you to everybody in the chat who participated with us. And we will look forward to seeing you next Monday. Aaron, thanks so much for being part of this.
It was so nice to be here. Thank you so much for your
Thank
gracious
you.
invitation.
Absolutely.
Good to be here.
All right. Have a great week,
Bye
everybody.
bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.